So my greetings to all the participants today. And on this Sunday, we thought that this time, because this subject is very, very important, we have been getting feedback from some of the bankers, some of the lawyers also, that Sunday this time also would be comfortable for us. So therefore, this webinar that we proposed on Sunday was based on the feedback from various past participants in our webinars. So the format that we had developed this time is like we are adding experts in the industry, and all the experts will share their knowledge and the experience with the participants. We have an intent to make it more and more meaningful to all participants. No politics, no kind of other objectives, just simply sharing our knowledge and experience with the participants, with our professional colleagues, with bankers, and with other younger professionals who actually would take the benefit of this.
So there is a request for us to increase the volume, and I will also request the participants to increase the volume at their devices.
Certainly, I think now it would be better. So I don't think any introduction is required. We only have to just say one thing, that Ms. Mamta Binani could not join the webinar today, although she prepared a good part of it. And because in her family, many people are COVID impacted, and she had to go to hospital at this particular moment, and therefore she is unable to participate, and she communicated that she should be excused for this from the participants. The experts that we have today is Advocate Alok Dheer, and who has been practicing for the last 35 years in BIFR, in SARFAESI, in insolvency. He's also an insolvency professional. He's a founder and chairman of Dheer and Associates, a law firm, and Mr. Alok Dheer also manages an asset reconstruction companies. So the limitation law as applicable to insolvency and bankruptcy matters has actually gone through various scenarios. One scenario was when the NCLT, in fact, the first scenario when there was no provisions like this, then there was insertion of section 238A in the law, then before that ANCLAD judgments, and after that ANCLAD judgments, and then finally Supreme Court judgment. It seems to have settled now, and the entire law, even the rationale of limitation law, for all that I would hand over to Mr. Alok Dheer for his detailed opinion about this limitation law, and later on I will actually look into the application to insolvency and bankruptcy law. Alok Dheer ji.
Thank you, Anil and Ankit. Let me start by saying good afternoon to all the panelists. And I must say, Anil and Ankit, from AAA, you have been coming up with various webinars for providing information and knowledge and sharing information. And I'm sure it is very beneficial to all of us. And here again, before I start, I must point out that I received a copy of the detailed PPT from. I really don't know what more to say. If you just take everybody through the PPT, it's more than enough. But anyways, I mean, since you called upon me to start and give a brief presentation on what the Limitation Act is all about and how does it apply to IBC, I'll give a small prospectus of what my views are and just take all the delegates through what are the twists and turns this law has seen under the IBC. And then, of course, we will have a very detailed presentation when you take everything. So, friends, coming to the limitation. This is a very basic legislation. I must tell my friends that limitation law and principles of limitation have been applicable in the judicial system since 1793.
Would you be able to increase the volume a little bit, of maybe that you need to be a little
I guess
closer
I
to the mic?
I just have to bring this closer. Is it any better?
Yeah, it's better. It's better.
Okay.
I was getting the feedback on the chat box about the volume.
Okay. So anyways, coming back to this, the principles of limitation. Just give me a second. I'm trying to see if I can increase the input level.
Yes.
Just give me a second. I hope it's better now.
Yes, yes, much better. Much
I think I will. So coming back to this Limitation Act, as I was saying, Limitation Act is a very basic principle of law. And we have had in the Indian judicial system the principles of limitation being applicable from as far back as 1790. By and large, it's a law of repose, peace, and justice, which bars the remedy after a period of time by way of public policy and expedience without extinguishing the rights. Which is very good. The basic principle is that nobody can sit on its own rights, sleep on its rights, and prejudice the interests of others. And finally, there has to be some sort of a limitation to enforcing rights. Otherwise, there will be total chaos because nobody will know what is happening. At any stage, somebody will be suing another party. And even after long years have passed and rights have been created between parties, somebody will come forth with a claim. So, to put a complete closure to all the issues, the Limitation Act is a very essential part of the legislation. In India, when it started in 1793, this was on the basis of certain regulations which were given from time to time. Over a period of time, they got consolidated into a limitation enactment which was 1859, 1871, 1877, and finally, after the Third Law Commission's recommendation, it got consolidated into the 1963 Act. Now, as I said, the purpose of the limitation is to put a quietus to the issues so that once for all matters get settled. Some of the relevant, now insofar as the Limitation Act and IBC is concerned, there are certain provisions of the Limitation Act which apply. Of course, Limitation Act under civil law applies to just about everything. But insofar as IBC is concerned, we are looking at a very select part of the Limitation Act which will apply, the principles of which will apply to the provisions of the IBC. Section 2J is very crucial. This is the period of limitation. Section 2J defines the period of limitation, and in fact, it refers to a schedule, which is very crucial because the schedule gives the dates of limitation and period of limitation for various events and various circumstances. And Section 3 puts the bar on limitation for suit, appeal, or application after prescribed period, and it says that if it is filed after a prescribed period of time, it is dismissed. So these are the two very crucial sections which make the applicability of Limitation Act. Therefore, you have to, under the schedule, within the period of limitation, start your proceeding. And secondly, if the proceeding is commenced at any period after the period as prescribed under the schedule, it will be dismissed for want of. So these are the enforcing provisions. I will come to the schedule later, but there are certain other relevant sections which I'm going to just basically hint at this and perhaps come back and explain to them in detail. Section 5 is the extension. So whatever is the period of limitation which is provided in the schedule, Section 5 gives an extension of that period. And that is if the concerned applicant, appellant, or as the case may be, satisfies the court that it had sufficient reason for not being able to file within the period of limitation, then there is an extension of period available, subject, of course, to the pleasure of the court and the satisfaction. The second relevant provision is Section 14, which provides for the exclusion of the time of the proceedings, where in a bona fide manner, the applicant has pursued or prosecuted the case in any court without jurisdiction or cause of the like nature, and that court cannot enter. So, if you have been proceeding or prosecuting something at a forum, at a court, which does not have the jurisdiction to entertain that, that particular period, if you have done in a bona fide manner, will be excluded from the determination of the period of. Section 18 is also relevant to us, which is acknowledgement of a liability in writing. Now, Section 18 will be very, very crucial. What is the meaning of acknowledgement of a liability? Is the various entries in the balance sheet treated as an acknowledgement of liability? Is a OTS application or an application for restructuring of a case to be treated as an acknowledgement of the liability? And if a person acknowledges the liability, what says that I am not entitled to pay, or puts in the same acknowledgement denies the requirement for making the payment for any reason at all. It could be even a counter claim. It will be treated as acknowledgement and will extend the period. So Section 14 was exclusion, Section 18 is extension, and Section 5 was also the extension. Section 19 is also very crucial. Section 19 talks in terms of effect of the payment on account of debt or interest. So if somebody during the period of limitation has made certain payments, then because of the making of such payments, the period of limitation will get extended. So it will become the event from which the period of limitation will start getting recalculated, and therefore the period of limitation as may be applicable will get extended. When we come to the schedule in the limitation, there are two very relevant articles in the schedule. One is Article 62, and there has been a lot of controversy with respect to these two articles, and therefore I am mentioning them in detail. Article 62 says that any suit for recovery to enforce payment of money secured by mortgage or otherwise charged on the immovable property. If there is any suit for recovery of money which is based on the mortgage or charged on the immovable property, then a period of 12 years is granted under this for the institution of such. On the other hand, obviously, if it's an unsecured creditor for recovery of money, a 3-year period is provided, for which there is hardly any dispute or difference of opinion. Then there is another article which is applicable, Article 137, which says that in case there is no other applicable provision in the schedule for which there is no period of limitation is prescribed for any specific pleading or filing, then the residual Article 137 comes into play, and it provides a period of 3 years as a period of, and there has been a controversy between 62 and 137, because as we know, most of the financial creditors who are banks or financial institutions or NBFCs or such other creditors who have given money against mortgage of immovable property and typically have been enjoying the 12-year period of limitation under Article 62. When it comes to IBC, a completely new arrangement is sought to be enforced, and Article 137 is sought to be applied. And it has a great deal of consequences, because while the financial creditor had a very long period and continues to have a very long period to enforce his right for filing a suit, for the purpose of filing the application under Section 7 or 9 under the IBC, he is consigned to the provisions of Article 137, and the period of limitation is getting reduced to 3 years. It has its own implications. Now, within the Limitation Act and the IBC provisions which are relevant and which I'll show how the interpretational play happens. The relevant provisions of the IBC are Section 3, subsection 12, which defines the word or the phrase default. It says non-payment of debt where part or whether it is interest or it is principal, part of the interest or principal has become due and has not been, it will constitute a default under IBC. Section 7 also now provides that financial creditor may file an application against the CD where default has occurred. Similarly, Section 8 says operational creditor On occurrence of a default, may issue a demand notice. And Section 9 says that within 10 days of the demand notice, he may file an application. Section 10 also says where CV has committed default. So under the provisions of IBC, whether the filing is under Section 7 or Section 9 or Section 10, all the three of them are predicated on the event of default. And default, as I mentioned, is defined in Section 3. Well, now, considering all these provisions of law, the limitation insofar as the applicability of the Limitation Act, insofar as the IBC is concerned, has taken twists and turns, typically like a snake and ladder. So we do not know where we are. We start by applying a particular limitation. That provision, the interpretation changes. We are very close to filing our application or have filed an application. It gets dismissed because there is one set of interpretations which has come. Later, we find that the interpretation has changed completely and now is a different interpretation. So, end of the day, for a long period of time, and I must say till about beginning of this year, March and April of 2021, and we are talking in terms of nearly 4 to 5 years from the date of the promulgation and implementation of the IBC. Most professionals, including us lawyers, were all at sea. We could not affirmatively convey to our clients as to what is the period of limitation which is applicable. And therefore, it was somewhat experimental insofar as these cases are concerned. Some other issues which will come and which we'll have to which we'll have to consider is when the interpretations are being made by NCLT, NCLAT, and Supreme Court, the question of purposeful contextual interpretation, which is a tool of interpretation, has somehow been missed out. If we recall, when the IBC was to come, one of the mischiefs which the IBC was at least supposed to resolve was that for a long period of time, the banks and financial institutions could not recover money. The existing judicial system was not in a position to resolve that issue in a time-bound manner, and therefore we needed to have IBC. But as soon as we had IBC, if you apply the principles of 137, a large chunk of these cases, which have been pending for long periods of time, to remedy which IBC was formed. Because if you have cases which are pending in SARFACI Act or recovery suits or DRT for years and years and years, if you apply 137, all of them will go out of the clutch of IBC. Again, there is another issue. There is a lot of say that IBC is not a recovery forum, but it's a resolution. In my humble understanding, every financial creditor or operational creditor has only one thing to look into insofar as the IBC is concerned. When will I get the money? How much will I get? So the focus of a lender is not that he is wanting to resolve a corporate debtor. The entire predication of lenders, of creditors, is recovery. They want their money. They just want to know how much, in what time frame. Please give me the money as soon as possible. So a lot of this discussion which has gone, interpretation which has gone, has been to a certain extent, to my mind at least, delayed by the fact that the courts have looked at the entire issue from the perspective that it is resolution and not recovery. Fairly speaking, the intent of the legislation as interpreted by the courts is resolution of the corporate debt, but not to forget the perspective of the lender, because we are now applying the limitation from the perspective of the lender. We are not applying the limitation from the perspective of the corporate debt. For the lender, it is a proceeding where he wants to recover. So when the word is used of the like, the question is an application under IBC filed by a financial creditor to see the resolution of a case, or is it ultimately his aim is to recover the money? If his aim is to recover the money, he should be covered under Article 62. If his aim is only a very general, broad aim that whether I get my money or not, the corporate debtor should be resolved, then of course applicability of 137. Therefore, a lot of lenders, I may just mention ARCs because they are buying debt from banks, and banks make all possible efforts for recovery before they give their debts to ARCs. Typically, the debts get acquired by ARCs much after a period of 3 years. So all of it is lost. And therefore, there is a consideration which even today is required. And when I take you through all the legislation or all the judicial pronouncements in this regard, I may just end by saying that the issue is not over yet. There are issues which have been reconsidered insofar as Limitation Act is concerned by the Supreme Court. And as I had said, twists and turns, repeatedly we have seen that succeeding benches of the Supreme Court have either clarified or in the sense of trying to clarify have completely changed the interpretation of the applicability of limitation law to IBC. And therefore, I would say one more issue which needs to be resolved over a period of time is the applicability of Article 62 versus 137. And if the courts continue to interpret it in this way, it may also be important to understand whether with so many ordinances, because the government has been coming with ordinances after ordinances to clarify issues, to resolve issues, to ensure that the mischief which was required to be prevented by the promulgation of IBC is actually prevented. And therefore, there may be a relook and an amendment where we may redefine 238A and try to see that we are back to applying the principles of Article 62 rather than 137. At this stage, let me just say, once the promulgation of the IBC happened, and Anil had in fact referred to some of this and say that there was initially the NCLTs started interpreting the applicability of Limitation Act to IBC. As I said, Limitation Act is so basic that without the principles of Limitation Act, no race can be run. If you don't know where to start, how can you run a race? How can you take up a proceeding of any nature if you have no starting point and no ending point? You will all be in chaos. You will all be going in circles without knowing, without any basis of how to start and where to end. And since, as I refer to the definition of default, it's a very specific definition from the date of default. The question arises, if it is from the date of default, the applicability of IBC happens. Is it in perpetuity? Is it limited in time? And therefore, when the IBC came in December 16, very quickly thereafter, there was a series of judgments by the NCLT, if I may say, led by the principal bench in Delhi, Ahmedabad bench, and so on and so forth. And some of the judgments I'll just refer to. And I said a very detailed presentation on all the judgments is there in Anil's GPT, and he will refer to them. But I will just, in passing, refer to some of these judgments. Because these are where the commencement of the applicability of the provisions of the Limitation Act started. The first one is obviously the Province Industries International Private Limited versus Actionist Park, which was March of 17, where the principal bench held that Limitation Act applies and dismissed the petition as being time barred. The Ahmedabad bench in SBI Colombo versus Western Refrigerators, again, May 17, Limitation Act applies. The Dean Rule Technology Limited versus USRL Steel, period of limitation applicable, a March 17 judgment. Sanjay Baroda versus Satyam Green, again, May 17, rejection of OC claim this time bar. So the principle that was being adopted at the beginning of the IBC was that Limitation Act is applicable. Now, a complete turnover took place in the NCLT in the case of Neelkant Township versus Urban Infrastructure. Complete turnaround. The NCLT says that there is nothing on record to show that the Limitation Act is applicable. This was followed by another judgment of the NCLT in Speculum Plast Limited in November 17, where they said that relying on the innovative matter of the Supreme Court, this is a complete code in itself. And therefore, the question of Limitation Act does not apply because in this code, there is no applicability of Limitation Act. In the meanwhile, while the NCLT was passing down these judgments, at the NCLT level, there was some confusion. NCLT Chandigarh in Visa Drugs in September 17 said Limitation Act does not apply. NCLT Mumbai in Machar Polymers in October 17 says they distinguished Neelkant judgment and says even if Limitation Act is not mentioned, the NCLT by itself cannot prescribe limitation on it. So there was a big confusion at this stage as to whether the Limitation Act will apply and how it will apply. And therefore, by an ordinance, the Government of India introduced the provision of Section 230. Principally, again, the issue of creditors cannot sleep over their rights and prejudice the other parties. And another question immediately after, so 238A says that Limitation Act, in so far as it may, is applicable, will apply to the provisions of rights. Immediately after 238, one of the questions which arose was whether it is prospective or it is retrospective in application. At this stage, the day of the NCLAT was, because there was no pronouncement on this issue from the Supreme Court. The NCLAT, the appellate body, had also already taken a view that the Limitation Act will not apply. And the NCLTs, to a certain extent, were taking somewhat divergent views. After 238A, where the issue of the applicability of Limitation Act, implications of 238A, and the prospective retrospective impact of 238A came to be considered by the Supreme Court in a landmark judgment called BK Education. And I'm again giving the date of that judgment because I want to show how over a period of time the twists and turns in this saga of limitation, applicability of Limitation Act came. Now, BK Education Services judgment is a October 18 judgment. Firstly, they said 238A is applicable with retrospective effect for applications under 7. Very simple. The second is that they said no period of limitation has been given in the IBC for the date of default. And therefore, Limitation Act will apply, but Article 137 will become the basis for determining the date of default for the commencement of limitation. So that is where the Article 137 applicability came from the Supreme Court. Immediately thereafter, Sagar Sharma, I must say, immediately thereafter in NCLAT, in Babulal Vardharajan matter, the NCLAT held that the case which is filed after a period of 3 years will be covered by limitation because Article 62 will be applicable. So after BK Education, NCLAT judgment said 62, whereas BK Education said 137, and there was some bit of anomaly which I will come to. However, immediately thereafter, in the Supreme Court, in the case of Sagar Sharma versus Phoenix ARC, in September 19, held that Article 62 is not applicable as IBC is predicated on date of default and is not a recovery procedure. Thereafter, another judgment of the Supreme Court came in the case of Jignesh Shah. In Jignesh Shah, the Supreme Court said right to file will be from the date of default. And another, if I may say, proceeding had come from the NCLAT, where they were saying that the date of limitation must be considered from the date of the promulgation of IBC, which is December 16. And Jignesh Shah very clearly held that it will be from the date of default and not from the date of promulgation of the IBC. But in Jignesh Shah, one very important line came, which has later been elaborated in various judgments. They said, however, acknowledge of debt will extend the period. Now, while this was happening on one end, the Supreme Court in the case of Gaurav Hargobind has clearly again mentioned that this is an application and not a suit. Article 137 will apply for a Section 7 proceeding. In the case of Vasudev Rao versus Bhujani, the right to sue occurs when default occurs and therefore 3 years period of limitation under Article 137 will be applicable. So this was going on. In the meanwhile, the matter of Babulal Vardhara came up before the Supreme Court in August. Babulal Vardharajan, relying on the Sagar Sharma judgment, upheld the BK Education Limited and said that the limitation period is extendable only by 5 years. In the meanwhile, another twist and turn came. NCLT in the Padma Kumar matter said that entries in the balance sheet but do not amount to acknowledgement of debt for extension of period under Section 18 of the. That has another story because it started another chain reaction of things to go on. Ultimately, it got overturned in Arcel versus Vishal Jaiswal in April 21. But not to go there, as of now, I would only say the confusion which was happening because the Padma Kumar judgment came. In this confused state of affairs, finally, in March of 21 and April of 21, 3 very significant judgments of the Supreme Court have come, which have, to a large extent, put quietness on this issue. The first of the judgments is the Sheshnath Singh versus Baidyanath, 22nd March 21. They said insofar as 238A is to be interpreted, it has to be interpreted in a liberal, contextual, and purposeful interpretation. You have to harmonize the subject matter and purpose of the legislation to the interpretation of this. This judgment held that Section 5, 14, and 18 of the Limitation Act will be applicable. And therefore, the provisions of Limitation Act at this stage, at Sheshnath stage, said that Article 137 is applicable. However, extension under Section 5 and exclusion of times under 14 and 18 will become applicable, and therefore the period of limitation will continue to be freshly determined on the basis of happening of an event. So if there's an acknowledgement of that, it will happen. If somebody has pursued the suit in a wrong forum or a wrong court, that extension of time will be given to them. Then came the judgment very quickly thereafter, within about 3 or 4 days. The Lakshmipat Surana judgment, 26th March 21. They said the intent of the IBC is not to open time bar debt. They reiterated that Section 18 is part of the Limitation Act. Acknowledgement under Section 18 does not give a new lease of life to a time bar debt. It also clarified that the Babulal Vardharajan judgment, when it said the extension under Section 5 is applicable, they did not rule out Section 18. And therefore, they read the judgment of Babulal contextually and said that it only had referred to Section 5. It did not by implication mean that Section 18 was not applicable. But another very important issue that has been laid down in Lakshmipat Surana is that any guarantee which has been given is coextensive with the borrower under Section 128 of the Contract Act. Therefore, if there is an extension of time, insofar as the borrower is concerned, in the case of the guarantor also there will be a so motu extension. Very quickly thereafter, these judgments started getting followed by NCLT. In Krishnalal Lakshmichand Bothra, the NCLT in April 21 held Section 18 is applicable to proceedings. Acknowledgement of debt in balance sheet or OTS proposal will be taken into consideration for determining Section 18. Because they said that if in an OTS proposal you have acknowledged your debt or in your balance sheet you have acknowledged your debt, it will be treated as an acknowledgement. Then in the case of Sanjay, 137 of the Act was applicable. And why this judgment is so important, it says 3 years will be computed after considering Section 18 and 19 of the Limitation Act. This is where Section 19 of the Limitation Act also became applicable. Of course, once you say that the provisions of the Limitation Act are applicable, all the provisions, including Section 19, are applicable. But Section 19 is very, very relevant because in very large number of cases we have seen that even though there is no specific acknowledgement of debt, and even the letters which have been written are sometimes very carefully written without admitting liabilities, and sometimes the letters also say without prejudice when they are giving OTS offers, etc. But if any payment has been made, the period of limitation will start. Then, in the case of Sandeep Jindal versus SBI, in April 21, again the NCLT has held that annual reports, balance sheets, OTS proposals, proposals for restructuring of loan cannot be ignored as debarred from consideration and will be taken into consideration for determination of the period of limitation. And the question they said is of applying the facts to the law and vice versa. So consideration of all these will become very, very important. Because I'm taking all the judgments in their time frame, there is finally a judgment of Arcels versus Vishal Jaiswal, where the Supreme Court has said entries in the books of accounts, including balance sheet, can amount to acknowledgement of debt and reset the limitation under Section 18. However, they have clarified, and it is rightly so because Section 18 is predicated on this. The acknowledgement of liability should be in writing, and that should be before the period of limitation. And it is in this judgment that the V. Padma Kumar judgment of the NCLT was overturned. So friends, at this analysis, what is the finality of things? Firstly, as on date, as I said, this may over time change because there is still people who argue that Article 62 is applicable. But currently, the position is this. The applicability of Article 137 of the Limitation Act is there for determining limitation and not Article 62. So the period from date of default will be 3 years. Secondly, the extension of the prescribed period under Section 5 will be granted if the applicant satisfies the court that he was prevented by sufficient cause from filing such an application. And I may just hark back here to Jignesh Shah. Why was it not argued at that stage that if the IBC was not there and I was pursuing the matter in DRT, then there was sufficient cause for me not to file the application? There was no enactment. So why Jignesh Shah did not take into consideration Section 5 of the Limitation Act is a question which remains unanswered and perhaps will come and be answered in a subsequent. The third is exclusion of Article 14, where proceedings are being prosecuted in a bona fide manner in good faith before a court which does not have limitation, which does not have the jurisdiction to entertain such a suit or cause of the like. Now, very important words. Suit or cause of the like. An application under Section 7, to my humble understanding, is certainly a cause of the like. It is similar in nature to a suit. It is for the purpose of the creditor, at least from his perspective, for recovery. But a very strange anomaly has come here. So I'll explain here. If you are a vigilant creditor, financial creditor, you file a case in DR, and the case has been filed and 3 years have gone from the date of default, you are barred from proceeding in the. However, if wrongly, rather than going to DRT, you filed a recovery suit in a civil court and 3-year period has gone, and you come back to IBC and say that, sorry, I mistakenly filed the suit in a court which did not have jurisdiction to entertain it, the exclusion of the period, the extension of the period will be given, the exclusion under Section 14 of the Limitation Act will apply. So it is to benefit a person who makes a mistake that exclusion of period will be given, but for a vigilant person who does not make a mistake, he will be barred. So according to me, it's a great anomaly which only needs to be cleared over a period of time. The effect of acknowledgement. The fourth issue is effect of acknowledgement of debt. As I have already said, Section 18 of the Limitation Act is applicable. So any acknowledgement of debt in writing, any OTS, restructuring proposal, resolution proposal, any other letter which has the effect of showing that there is an acknowledgement of debt will give the effect, will reset the period of limitation. From that date, the period of 3 years under Article 137 will be restarted. Then the last principle which will be applicable is the effect of payment. If any payment has been made on account, then this will get covered under Section 19. And from that date, the period of limitation will be reset. So that, my friends, is the principles of Limitation Act which are applicable to the ICC proceedings as on date. Obviously, this may change over a period of time, but these are the 4 principles which are applicable. What happened?
Light at our end is, I think. No, I think it's back.
Can I?
Yes, you can continue. You can continue.
Ankit is still in the dark.
I think he is also switching on the light.
He's also switching on. So I mean, just at this stage, I mean, considering that the session talked in terms of basic rationale dealing with claims under CIRP and limitations. So limitation and applicability of 238 I have already dealt with. The claims under CIRP and liquidation I will deal with very briefly, and then leave, as I said, you to the PowerPoint presentation that Anilji has prepared. Now, insofar as the claims under CIRP is concerned, we are aware of Regulation 6, which talks in terms of 14 days time to be given. However, repeatedly, the NCLTs have been given time. They have been holding that the provisions of the regulation are directory in nature. In fact, in the case of the principal bench, one of the earlier judgments, in the case of 21st century wire roads, they considered that the insolvency commencement date was September 18. Again, I think there is again light outage. The COC, the claim was filed in March of 19, much later. But at that point of time, the COC was considering the resolution plan, and therefore they directed the RP to consider it. In Edelweiss versus Edel Landmark, the NCLT held the rejection of claim on ground of delay was not sustainable. Provision was held to be directory. RP was directed to take note. In the meanwhile, in NCLT, the NCLT in Santosh Vasantrao matter versus Vijay Kumar Iyer said, claim up to passing of the plan, if they are filed, will be considered by the RP. NCLT in the case of SBI versus ARGL said that in case of a claim filed by a government authority relating to government deals, since the claim is reflected in the books of accounts, it is irrelevant whether a claim is filed or not. If it is already provided in the books of account, the RP and IRP are required to take cognizance. Another matter in the NCLT, which I may mention, is a case called Dream Procon, where the Noida Authority filed an application for consideration of claim as RP, treated that the claim is deleted and rejected it. The COC had approved the resolution plan by that stage. So what had happened is Noida Authority's claim was filed, rejected by the RP as deleted. He filed an application before NCLT. NCLT was considering this application. In the meanwhile, the COC approved the plan. The NCLT thereafter passed an order that the COC will consider the claim, and therefore, because this direction for consideration of the claim was passed, COC was reconvened after the passing of the approval of the plan for giving an opportunity to Noida Authority for its claim being considered. Having said that, very recently, in April of 2001, the Supreme Court in Ghanshyam Mishra has said that all claims will be extinguished after the approval of the plan. So the principle remains, and just before I go to the final principle, one more aspect I would want to refer here. In Swiss ribbons, the Supreme Court has held that IRP, RP are not quasi-judicial bodies, but they are required only for the admission, verification, and collation of claims. So therefore, it reaches a very strange situation here that RPs cannot determine; they are not adjudicating authorities. They can admit, verify, or collate the claim. If they do not consider a claim, the person has to file an application before the NCLT. Only NCLT can adjudicate on the claim. So that is the principle. In the meanwhile, as I said, the Supreme Court in Ghanshyam Mishra has said that claims are extinguished at the stage of approval. So the position of law which emerges with respect to the claims under CIRP is that you can file a claim within the period which is prescribed under the advertisement which is issued. You can file a claim within that period. If the claim is belated, it doesn't matter, because the NCLT is saying that you will still consider the claim until the resolution plan is passed. So you will continue to file the claim. So the purpose and the timeline which is prescribed has actually really become redundant. However, the only suffrage is that if the claim is filed after the plan has been approved, then of course it gets extinct. But the interplay is that if your claim has been rejected, you file a claim before NCLT. In the meanwhile, if the COC passes an order and approves the plan, you will still get an opportunity for consideration, despite the fact that your claim was belated, merely because the matter was pending before the NCLT. So that is the principle for belated claims under the CIRP. Now, the belated claims during liquidation. Again, the provision of Regulation 12 is there, where the period of 30 days has been provided. In this particular case, there is applicability of two rules. One is Rule 177 and the other is Rule 178 of the Company Code rules. They deal with the procedure on failure to prove debt within fixed time. And I must say the principles will become applicable to the claims which are being filed under litigation. Of course, Anilji will have his own, because he has done a lot of liquidation cases and must have seen and faced certain circumstances of this nature, and he will elaborate it in detail. Now, insofar as Rule 177 is concerned, if the claimant fails to prove his debt in the time prescribed, in the, of course, under the Company Code rules in terms of Rule 148, when the advertisement is issued, he may apply to the court for relief, and court may adjudicate or ask the liquidator to adjudicate claim. However, Rule 178 says a creditor who has not proved his claim before declaration of dividend, which means before distribution of money, if he has not proved his claim before distribution of money, he will not be entitled to any part of the amount which has been distributed in the past. But if the liquidator is having any money or recovers any money subsequently, in that portion of the claim, he will be entitled to his share in terms of the decision, this decision is a very old decision under Rule 178, T.R. Rajkumar versus Motion Picture Producers Combined, AIR 1942, Madras 3. Now, in the NCLT, in Ashmi Enterprises, in case liquidation proceedings are not yet finalized, no harm or prejudice if the claim of the applicant is admitted or adjudicated. I would say similar to the provisions of Rule 177 and 178. So, my friends, this is what my conspectus of the law relating to limitation with respect to applicability of 238A applicability of Limitation Act to petitions filed under Section 7, 9, and applicability of the Limitation Act to the claims filed under the CIRB and the Liquidation Act. In the liquidation proceedings is there. And I may now give the thing back to Ankit, so that Ankit can go on with the bringing in Anil ji and his presentation for all of us to consider. I must Anil ji also say that I will be equally interested in going through the presentation that you are going to go, give at this particular point.
So thank you, Alokji, for that very, very deliberate, very, very detailed account of all the recent case laws and the interpretation from the same. My suggestion now is that we have about 26 questions. And I think what we can do is we can put the presentation on sharing, and we can answer these questions also by way of the slides. And I will also request both Alokji and Anil sir to keep answering those questions, and that can be a Q&A. Will that be the right approach?
I think yes, Ankit, because while I would be sharing my screen, and in case you find that the slides which are going on, in case there is any related questions, I think you can ask at the same time while the slides are going on. So I would actually take through the slides very quickly. Will not like to repeat anything which Alokji has already said, and I would like to make it as useful for all the participants as the session of Alokji has been. So I would only start with my presentation, and give me 1 second.
Ankit, I just want to say that I may have to leave in between. I will try to remain here as long as possible to share Anilji's slide, which in any case, copy of which I have. But I may have to leave in the meanwhile, so you'll excuse me. And I will also say to the delegates that apologies that I have something very urgent to attend to, and I may have to leave. Otherwise, I would have been more than happy to stay here and get the benefit of the slide which Anilji, presentation which Anilji is reading out. But
so in that case, maybe I can ask some questions.
I think in between we can ask the questions also. Maybe that we will
as long as I'm here,
we will request Alokji that you can actually little bit of little extend your period of this, and then
I will try, Anil, to remain as much as possible. I'm waiting for a call. Once the call comes ahead.
Yes.
Till then, I will.
So I think the entire PPT is almost not required to be gone through again and again. The rationale has been very well explained by Alokji, and the applicability of this rationale on the insolvency and bankruptcy law has also been taken up very clearly, Alokji. But then the kind of NCLT orders, the Supreme Court orders have been seen in the past 4 years, even prior to that also. That still creates a lot of questions in the minds of the participants, in the minds of the professionals, and also the litigants. So the law of when we talk about the limitation law, I would start with the scenario that it actually starts with the 2-3 things. One, that when we say, as Alokji already said, the period of limitation and the prescribed period. See, when we actually talk about the period of limitation, let us start with one subject, that in each particular law, there would be a time limit which is prescribed for any act to be done. And that act can be even filing of claims, that act can be for filing of the appeals. So that also is covered under Section 12. So this is one part of the limitation law which is applicable on the various timelines given in law, in any law. So when we talk about Section 12, so there are a couple of things that we would like to say, that there are some exclusions for Section 12. One exclusion is that the day of the judgment is excluded from the timeline. Second, the time for obtaining copies of the order, decree, or even the sentence is also excluded from the timelines. And also the time for obtaining the award is excluded from the timelines. Of course, there are further adjudication on these matters, like if somebody applies after 1 month for taking a copy of the order, so the time lag between the order, the date of the order, and the the date on which you applied, that also would not be considered as excluded. However, the time taken by the court or the authority, that would be excluded. This is one part of the limitation law. And the second part of the limitation law that Alokji and we are dealing with is this period of 3 years or the period of 12 years, if it is applicable to all those cases where some security interest is created on any immovable property. So this is the Article 62 is also very, very important, where I would again go back, because still people are asking question on the chat box, whether there is a complete clarity about this 3 years or 12 years on all those loans which have a security interest on an immovable property and backed by a document of security interest. So there is also a kind of uh, opinion that if something is written in that document, that would also become the time the limitation period. This section 13 is not really relevant to the insolvency, but then section 14 is relevant. Section 14 is relevant when we talk about excluding the time where the proceedings have been going on in a court without jurisdiction. Now it comes to a very big question, whether this without jurisdiction or with jurisdiction. There are judgments, conflicting judgments of ANCLAD if the SARFAESI proceedings. First of all, it has been held that the SARFAESI proceedings are civil proceedings. It has been held by the courts. Second, if the SARFAESI proceedings have been taken, like this action under SARFAESI law has been taken by the lender, so that particular would be considered as the same cause of action, and the same cause of action continues. And if there is any other remedy available later on, or in case the lender resorts to any other remedy, I think this the law of limitation would actually be considered as if only up to the time of filing of the or starting the SARFAESI proceedings, or for the other matter, maybe the winding up proceedings under the Companies Act. So there are conflicting judgments, and we would also discuss with Alokji whether there is any kind of conclusion on this, because I have two judgments with me of ANCLAD. In one judgment, it is saying that the SARFAESI proceedings under SARFAESI would not be excluded from the period of limitation. And the very, very recent judgment in April 21, ANCLAD again says in the case of James George, I will just come to that order, where the ANCLAD has very clearly said that the same cause of concern is continuing and the default is continuing, and the proceedings of SARFAESI would be considered as the exclusion from the period of the limitation. Now, also in some kind of special causes, like maybe section 15, where some kind of stay is there, some kind of issue of order, maybe even this when the like section 5 of the Limitation Act, which talks about the condonation of delay in case of the reasonable cause, or section 15 in case of any stay or injunction, or even kind of the orders which are being issued by Supreme Court or High Courts, or even the state authorities for COVID reasons, where the complete country is under lockdown or some parties under lockdown, that also would be covered either under section 5 of the Limitation Act or under section 15 of the Limitation Act. Then the basic principles, like in the case of fraud or mistake, section 17 talks about that there is no limitation period. The limitation period starts when the mistake or fraud is discovered. Even if a fraud is discovered after 10 years of the actual happening of the fraud or mistake, but the day it is discovered, the period of limitation starts from that day. That has been held in a Bombay High Court matter. Again, the section 18 is of course very important, where this Supreme Court judgment has recently been pronounced with 3-bench order, where the written acknowledgement of any property, right, or liability from a party whom such property, right, or liability is claimed, it is on the doctrine of admission. So section 9 also says that the fresh period of limitation will start fresh period of limitation will start in case there is any payment is made. In case any payment is made or any interest is paid, that also would be considered as a fresh period of limitation will start. Similarly, section 21 talks about see, like when a party is not added, suppose a party, like there are 2 or 3 parties and the law of limitation is applicable to all the parties. So if one party is not added to the suit, the law of limitation would be applicable from the day when that particular party is added to the suit. So all this is like all section 12, 13 has actually been completely explained by Alokji. We would actually try to see what actually could be slightly different. So the acknowledgement of debt, we have seen this Tilak Ram versus Nathu, that's a Supreme Court order, and it says that even the balance sheets, the books of accounts, any emails that also would be considered, where in the email, if there is any discussion about the amount payable or amount receivable, that also would be considered as acknowledgement of debt, and the period of limitation will get extended. The check given by a debtor to pay his due is also an acknowledgement, and any acknowledgement also in paper, if it is given prior to the expiration of a limitation period, that also would be considered as section 18 item. Now, when we talk about this IBC, I already said that like the time for filing appeals and the time for accept the kind of debt. The Alokji has already explained that initially there was orders from NCLAT where this was held that the limitation law is not applicable. Then this insolvency law committee, and then finally the induction of section 238A with effect from 6th of June 2018. And section 238A says as the provisions of the Limitation Act 1963 shall, as far as may be, apply to the proceedings or appeals before the adjudicating authority, National Company Law Appellate Tribunal, the Debt Recovery Tribunal, or Debt Recovery Appellate Tribunal, as the case may be. So this was section 238A inserted on 6th of January 2018. Now with this section 238A, when it was inserted, the first controversy came before the Supreme Court was in the case of BK Educational Services Private Limited, and it was regarding whether this is a prospective or retrospective. So the Supreme Court held that this 238A is retrospective and it is not prospective. So all those cases whatsoever are pending before any tribunal under IBC, on all those cases, this section 238 would be considered as applicable, and the law of limitation would be applicable to on all those cases. However, the admission of the application, whatever has been done earlier, those were not really changed. Then the second question came as on the date of default, because see, we have to calculate this 3 years period from the date of default. So this also remained a matter of dispute, and Alokji has also said, Jignesh Shah, for the first time, the date of default would be the date of default, and it would not be the enactment of IBC, that is 1st of December 2016. So the date of default, that is as defined under the IBC. First, there has to be a debt, and then there has to be a default. The default does not relate to NPA. The Supreme Court has also held in this case the right to apply will arise from the date of default. That was held in Gaurav Hargovind Bhai Dave versus Asset Reconstruction Company India Limited. However, in one case named as Jagdish Prasad Sharda versus Allahabad Bank, NCLAT has held that the date of default was considered as the date of declaration of account as NPA. So maybe in some cases where the actual date of default is not available, then might be it has come to the uh, second option, that this can be considered as the date of NPA also. So in one of the case, which is the Vasudev B. Bhojwani, this is again in the referring to BK Educational, where the Supreme Court has held when the recovery certificate was issued in 2001 and filing application under Section 7 in 2007 would not be considered as valid, and the time started ticking from 2001. So it's like, let's see, we actually have been seeing, Alokji has also attended to this part, whether the claims, while actually admitting the claim during CIRP or during liquidation, what is the limitation? So the first limitation that we say that we have to admit the claims within 14 days, and beyond 14 days, the claims may not be admitted, and later on in the regulations that we've seen that the claims may be admitted up to 590 days. However, this is all declaratory and not mandatory, because this has been watered down by various judicial pronouncements, whereas various courts have allowed the claims to be admitted or to be received blatantly from the creditors. So that has actually been watered down. So the timelines given in the IBC or the regulations for admission of claim during liquidation or during CIRP has been watered down, and it is only the finality now is that before the resolution plan is approved by the committee of creditors, that is the only final lines. There is a clear line now on this particular part that the claims should be received. I think this is also like Ghanshyam Mishra has also been discussed by Alokji, and I would just take it to the ratio. So the in this like NCLAT has also said in the case of Edelweiss Asset Construction Company versus Edel Landmarks Limited, this is again has been referred where it has been admitted by the NCLT. Now, during this CIRP or during liquidation, when as an RP or as a liquidator, we receive claims from creditors. Now, when we receive claims from creditors, we are supposed to see whether the claims are time barred or not. And if the claims are time barred, then of course the RP or the liquidator has no power to admit those claims. This needs an adjudication, because see, like when the complete verification would be done by the RP, at times RP would see that there is a balance in the books of account, and that means that the time of limitation is already because the acknowledgement has triggered in. So there are various things that the RP can ask information from the corporate debtor, from the books of the corporate debtor, and also ask information from the claimant, and those all would be considered while accepting the claims during CIRP or liquidation, whether those claims are time barred or not. However, the time barred claims should not be accepted. The time barred claims cannot be accepted. So we've been asked questions regularly whether the claims of the home buyers can also be time barred. One situation is that whatever money has been given by the home buyer is appearing in the books of account and also in various other records, maybe the RERA records, maybe any other records where the list of creditor along with the amount has already been given, submitted by the corporate debtor, so that will become acknowledgement. So the home buyers claims, and secondly, then there is no unit which has been delivered to them, so they would not be considered as time barred. So like this is again the entire scenario regarding the claims which can be accepted by the which should be accepted by the RP or the liquidator. So I would again say the couple of things that based on various judgments, we would actually see these are all the the OTS, when a letter is being issued by the corporate debtor to any of the lender that I'm interested in OTS, and in the OTS letter, I think whatever maybe that now from we can even discuss with Alok ji. Alok ji, if the OTS letter very clearly says that without prejudice to our rights, and if it clearly says that without even impacting on our rights on the limitation law, if an OTS letter is issued to bank and it is some amount is offered to bank, would that also be considered as acknowledgement, even despite referring very clearly that it should not prejudice our rights under the limitation law? What is your opinion about it? Ankit, Alokji is available or what? Just try to.
I think he is not available. I think I can't see him, and even within participants, no, I think he must have had to leave.
So I think he must have had to leave.
Yeah.
So this part that we are trying to deal with is again having some kind of controversy. Then the account is declared NPA, and thereafter, if a payment is made, if an account is declared NPA and thereafter a payment is made, that has also been considered as an acknowledgement in a judgment by in the name of Rajendra Nirotam Das Seth versus Chandra Prakash Jain, and this is again like December 20 judgment. This is what I was referring to in the first case, which is Gradient Nirman Private Limited versus IFCI. It was held suit for recovery based upon cause of action, even if it is within the limitation, it cannot in any manner impact the separate and independent remedy of a winding up proceeding. A suit for recovery is separate and independent proceeding distinct from remedy of winding up, and therefore the period spent while pursuing SARFAESI proceeding cannot extend the period of limitation, as the intent of the court is not to give a new lease of life to that which is already time barred. So in this particular judgment, NCLAT held, and that was in May 2020, that this SARFAESI proceedings cannot extend the period of limitation, whereas in this latest judgment, which is 5th of April 2021, Thomas George versus Union Bank of India, it has been held that the rationale that the Section 7 proceedings under IBC are not time barred when SARFAESI proceedings have been initiated at an early occasion, and keeping in view the provisions of Section 14 of the Limitation Act 1963, the same shall be considered while calculating the period of limitation. So this is also one part which is like controversial, but however, we have to just rely on the latest judgment, that is April 2021 from NCLAT, where if the SARFAESI action has been taken in time, that actually would be considered as extension of the limitation period. Then again, coming to the written communication that we write to lenders for settlement, for any kind of letters, proposal, settlement agreement, payment, some part of the payment, all that would be considered as giving fresh lease of life to the liability with fresh period of limitation commencing from the such acknowledgement in writing. That has also been held in this case, which is Hussain Qadri versus Edelweiss Asset Reconstruction Company. That also is a good judgment.
You want to take some questions?
Yeah, I can take some questions.
So there are about 38 questions. I will be taking the questions starting from the most recent questions, because I think they'll be most relevant to what we are discussing. And maybe we can answer the questions with the case laws, the relevant case laws that are there with respect to those cases. So the recent question is in case this is from Santanu Ji, that he's asking that in case a CD is closed from the last 4 years and a Section 7 application is admitted, then what happens to all the operational creditor claims? All of them may be time barred. So some discussion on what is the role of the RP and the liquidator to apply Limitation Act on the claims received by him. So we are not talking about whether the claims were received within 14 days or before the resolution plan. We're also talking about what papers or what documents does the person have with respect to exercising his claim in recent time. And I think from the conversation, we could also anyways understand that if the books of accounts are available, then the RP's duty is to look at the books of accounts and perhaps see if the claim has been admitted within the books of accounts or not. So maybe you can take that further.
I think this is what we have just discussed, that there are two parts of the limitation law. One is that the timeline provided in the law, and the timeline is 14 days for CIRP, and then subsequently as per regulations 90 days, and for liquidation it is 30 days. However, that has been watered down by various court orders, and it has been directed to RPs and the liquidators to accept the resolution plan, and the finality is that the resolution professional or liquidator can accept the claims before the resolution plan is admitted. And there has been many orders from NCLT and NCLAT.
So
now, I think what Mr. Shantanu is saying is in case the claims are submitted to RP and there has not been any operations in the company for the last 4 years, and the claims are being filed from the operational creditors, how the RP should verify whether those claims are time barred or not. This is the question from Mr. Shantanu. So the question is recently, just now I've answered this, that the RP's duty is to ask for subsequent documents to verify whether it is time barred or not. Secondly, it is RP's duties to verify the books of account. Finally, in case the books of account also has a debt, if the books of account has a debt, then the period of limitation would stand extended, because the books of account is definitely be considered as an acknowledgement of debt. And in case the operational creditor provides some kind of email or some kind of communication or some kind of confirmation from the corporate debtor, that also would be considered as acknowledgement of debt. So the most important would be that the books of accounts and the balance sheet of the corporate debtor, in case it is prepared. Now, I think the question can further be extended in case there is no balance sheet available and no books of account available, then whatever claims will come from the operational creditor, and based on the information which is provided by the operational creditor, the RP will have no other option other than accepting the claims and assuming that the limitation law is applicable based on the books of accounts may have this entry, and based on the balance sheet of the company, if prepared or if has been prepared, that would have this entry as a creditor. So that is the scenario where the companies are closed and the RP definitely should accept them. And if there is no, in case the RP finds a claim from an operational creditor and he finds no entry, in the books of account, he finds nothing in the balance sheet, and he also asks the operational creditor, like how would he explain the time of limitation. So in case no reply comes, then I think the RP should not accept those claims which are time barred.
So then we have a question from Mr. Rohit Prabhakaran. He's asking that can GST department, which is an operational creditor, file its claim after NCLT approves the resolution plan? I think we have, and here the nitty-gritty is that the past resolution plan is being challenged with NCLT. So in this case, what is your opinion? Can GST department give this claim? My practical thought process is also that in this kind of a scenario, normally the GST which is outstanding as per the books of accounts is anyways made part of the resolution plan.
Now, like GST claims, when we actually talk about GST claim, first of all, we can see whether the books of accounts have created that provision or not. Secondly, we can also see that the online portal of the company has also the information about that kind of liability of the corporate debtor or not. So all this is considered to be the records which can satisfy that yes, there is an acknowledgement. There is an acknowledgement by the corporate debtor. Otherwise, the corporate debtor could have represented before the GST that this particular claim which is appearing on your portal is not correct. But if nothing has been represented before the GST department, books of accounts has this entry, the orders has been communicated to the corporate debtor, then the GST claim cannot be considered as barred by limitation.
So the question over here is only I think the question is specific that if it is if the claim is filed after the resolution plan has been passed. That was the
after the resolution plan is approved, and that has to be like we have seen in one or two cases after the resolution plan is approved and the NCLT is saying that it should be considered, it is kind of directed to the RA. It should be considered, like especially in the case of home buyers. So in the case of home buyers, now we are guiding everyone that whatever resolution plan comes, there should be a treatment. There should be a, a provisions in the resolution plan that how those claims will be dealt with in case received after the resolution plan is approved. And based on those provisions in the resolution plan, then the adjudicating authority finds a way out and will tell the claimant that there is a provision in the resolution plan how to handle those claims, and your claim will be handled as per that particular clause. So in the case of home buyers, it is very important. However, in the case of other operational creditors, or in some other cases, we have seen when the resolution plan is approved and some people filed, some financial creditors, secured financial creditors, some banks, they filed claims before adjudicating authority, and it was considered that while the resolution plan is being approved by the adjudicating authority, those claims were considered, and accordingly some modifications were sought from the RA, and the distribution of the proceeds of the resolution plan was modified during the hearings of the resolution plan. So that has been experienced by us. However, not like the law presently should be very clear that after the resolution plan is approved by the committee of creditor, the RP doesn't have any power to approve any admit any claim. And that, of course, in case it has to be done, that would be done by the adjudicating authority or the appellate authority. Yes, Ankit.
So next question is from Mr. Rajiv Dhingra. He's asking that in CIP matter, if CD employees are not able to substantiate some debit note parked for some OC, how to go about acceptance rejection of such debit note which have an effect of reduction of amount of dues? So I think this is not relating to limitation per se.
This is not limited, but then certainly we can share our experience. As far as the debit notes are concerned, like just passing a debit note and making an entry in books of account doesn't get this liability extinguished. Suppose I have invoices and I have invoices worth 1 crore of rupees and which was entered in my books of account. Suddenly on a particular day, I issue some debit notes without any acceptance from the other party, and I make entries in my books of account without any acceptance from the other party. That would not extinguish the claim of the other party because the debit notes are not accepted by the other party. So the other party's claim would still be will continue to be a valid claim.
So moving on, then the next question I can take up is from Anand, Mr. Anand Bagari. He was asking that whether TDS reflected in Form 26S will be considered as acknowledgement of debt, and whether period of limitation can be considered from the date of TDS booking. So I believe yes, TDS which has been acknowledged by somebody in their books of accounts is an acknowledgement that they have considered this invoice in their books of accounts or entered it into their books of accounts.
Certainly, because now the TDS details is also available in Form 26AS, which is downloaded from the income tax portal. And in that particular Form 26AS, in case we see that somebody to whom we have issued some invoices has deducted TDS, that actually means that he has made entries in his books of accounts for that particular invoice and he has deducted the TDS. No further evidence is required because he has deducted the TDS. That means that he has acknowledged the debt.
Then we have a question on GST assessment orders were issued in March 2021, raising demands of rupees 2.5 crores for assessment year to 2017-18 and 18-19. Resolution plan was approved by COC in December 2019, but yet to be approved by AA. Can GST validity file its claim before RP or NCLT? Yes, I believe so.
It's already answered. Like the resolution plan has been approved by the committee of creditors. The RP has no power to admit any further claim, and the RP can only the only GST department has only one remedy to go to adjudicating authority and file their claim in case it is admitted, and that can be considered while passing the resolution plan by the adjudicating authority, and by also seeking some modifications from the RA without impacting the overall outgo from the RA. and then and that's what is happening nowadays in the in the NCLT. Like if a resolution plan is pending and there are some further claims, so the distribution pattern stands changed in the process, but the overall outgo of the RA is not supposed to be changed.
Is there any case law on the TDS being considered as acknowledgement of debt? That's what Anandji is asking. If we have any case law, we can share.
No,
Otherwise,
I
we
think,
can.
see, I think what we are trying to say today is like in case we see the date of this judgment, V. Padma Kumar versus Stressed Asset Stabilization Fund, and this judgment of Asset Reconstruction Company India Limited versus Bishal Jaiswal, these all they dated 14th of April 2021. So 14th of April 2021 is the final date when we are saying that the acknowledgement of that would be considered as extension of the limitation period. So from now onward, everyone will try to find out the various ways of acknowledgement of debt, and then only we will find the different adjudications from NCLT or for NCLAT. However, what I understand is that this, yes, this as far as this part is concerned, this is completely acceptable. That if someone is accepting your bills, someone is accepting your invoices, that means that he has accepted the liability. That itself is the date of the acceptance. Also, it is not simply like acknowledgement of the debt, it is also considered to be the accepting the bills and also making entries in the books of account.
So the next question is can the OC ask for certified liability schedule by the auditor to see whether his claim is acknowledged in preparation of balance sheet of the CD? I don't think so. You can't. The OC has no right to approach the auditor of the CD.
No, auditor has OC has no right. Auditor is not supposed to pass on this information to anyone.
Yeah.
This is auditor is doing this audit, and auditor is
rather
keeping
auditor,
this information.
Yeah, auditor is also bound by confidentiality laws.
Yes.
So Anandji is asking, sorry, Sumit Consulti is asking that, sir, the appeal before NCLAT under section 61(2) gets time barred after 45 days. So in such a scenario, does Rule 15 NCLAT rules gets redundant? In your view, which timelines has Rule 15 been effective practically?
I think these timelines as provided in any kind of law, and in case the section 5 of the limitation law is applicable, the condonation has to be applied. The adjudicating authority or the court would see the justification of the delay, the reasonable cause behind the delay, and then this condonation would be allowed as far as this 45 days is concerned or 30 days is concerned for filing appeals. The reasonable cause is like there can be many reasonable cause. The documents were not available. I was prevented for any other reason, and because the COVID also can be something like that. So all this can be reasonable causes for delay in filing the appeals.
Mr. Ashok is asking that if OC invoices are not entered by CD in the books of account and OC has no control on the CD books, then why OC suffers for rejection of his claim of his duty supplied goods? I don't think we can. If he's able to provide documentation which says that yes, he has acted judicially and law of limitation does not apply to him, then these are the talks about books of accounts and acknowledgement of debt in the CD's books of accounts are ancillary.
I will actually refer to differently. See, Ankit, now what the question is, like the OC has supplied goods, OC has issued invoices, and what we are talking about the time of 3 years. See, like in case the OC is not getting any reward from the company, from the corporate debtor, that means that the OC was sleeping and the limitation law is applicable. So the OC needs to act upon, and he would definitely look into his remedies available under any law. And he definitely cannot sleep over 3 years and later on say that the CD's books are not in his control. Because in case he's not getting any kind of response from the CD, he must be sending emails, letters for payment. But in case he's not getting any response, he should have taken the any remedy available, maybe court case or maybe any other remedy available. But in case he's sleeping over, the limitation law would be applicable, and he would definitely be adversely impacted by the limitation law.
And Mr. Anil Acharya is saying that as per the Limitation Act, he says that the period of limitation prescribed for any suit, appeal, or application by the schedule. So he's talking about how the period of limitation has been described and the prescribed period is defined. So his opinion, I believe, is that he says that the RPIRP cannot consider a time barred, cannot consider a claim as time barred. It is the AA which has the authority to take a call on the limitation of any claim. So I think, Anilji, if the NCLT, if the AA becomes the authority, then everyone will start filing claims before the AA. So that's what I think Alokji also mentioned and Anil sir also mentioned. Then that will be too much of judicial scrutiny, and the whole claim processing part will go to NCLT effectively.
I think what he's referring to is that the duty of the RP is only to collate the claims. Whereas in case we see the regulations, in the regulations it is also said that the duty of the RP is to verify the claims. Whereas in the liquidation process, it is a judicial duty. The liquidator acts as a judicial officer and is actually adjudicating on the claims. Whereas during CIRP, it may be slightly different. Whereas in the liquidation process, it is very clear that the liquidator would actually adjudicate the claims and would be considered as a quasi-judicial authority for adjudicating the claim. So during liquidation, it is certainly within the powers of the liquidator to verify the claims and also check the law of limitation. However, in CIRP, since the claims are supposed to be collated and the verification is not supposed to be to the extent of adjudication, I to some extent agree with the Anilji, that yes, during CIRP, slightly it may be a different, and somebody can definitely because the claims would be accepted and the resolution applicant would be offering some amount to them. But still, to my understanding, the RP should provide this information in the information memorandum so that it is known to the RA. So how to handle these kind of claims, which finally would be considered as the time bar.
So even when the RP or the IR, when the RP is putting this into the information memorandum, he is taking a decision whether the Limitation Act is applying to this person or not, or this claim or not. So at some point in time, he has to frame an opinion and then maybe wait for any judicial scrutiny in case somebody differs on that point of view.
Yeah. Certainly.
Vannaji is asking that in case of personal guarantors, what are the judgments giving right to personal corporate debtors of personal guarantors to seek information from corporate debtor of company undergoing CIRP under section 99 of the code? I don't think it relates to limitation, right?
It doesn't relate to information. Yeah. I could rather say that in one case, the personal guarantor has given an acknowledgement to the bank regarding the debt while he was trying to settle with the bank as an OTS. And that was also considered as acknowledgement of debt based on that NCLAT order.
Okay.
And another NCLAT order is like this BIFR matter. In case the BIFR proceedings continues for 10 years and that particular period, a creditor was not able to file a case because of the moratorium in the BIFR cases under SICA. So that was also excluded because at that time, the operational creditor was not supposed to file any case for the recovery. So that was also excluded. So this was the case like Gauri Prasad Goenka versus Punjab National Bank. Yes, Ankit, go ahead. It's like one important part, which is actually, I would also like to say, in this recent case on 21st of April 2021, the Asset Construction Company India Limited versus Bishal Jaiswal. So in this particular thing, there are three matters which has been decided by Supreme Court. One, that the intention of the acknowledgement of the debt is irrelevant. No, it was pleaded before the Supreme Court that when this acknowledgement was being done or when this letter or the emails was being issued, the intention was different. The intention was not to acknowledge the debt. But then, however, the Supreme Court has said that the intention of acknowledging the debt is irrelevant. And it was also said that while the filing of the balance sheet is under compulsion of law, but making any particular remission of debt in the balance sheet is not, because it was also argued between the Supreme Court before the Supreme Court that now you're saying that the acknowledgement in the balance sheet is the appearance in the balance sheet is acknowledgement of debt, whereas that's my compulsion. I has to file. That doesn't mean that I admit. But he said the Supreme Court says that the filing of the balance sheet is under compulsion, but not making. While making, you can actually remove a debt. Also, the Supreme Court has held that the balance sheet must be approved by the shareholder and accompanied by director's report. In case the balance sheet is not approved by shareholder and is not accompanied by director's report, then the acknowledgement in the balance sheet may not be considered as valid for the purpose of extension of period of limitation. Yes, Ankit, you can take up questions.
I will ask the next question from Ashok Ji. He says that may in DRT discussions of advocate of CD, any written documents given to DRT be treated as acknowledgement of debt in case CD has not challenged his liability in DRT. Of course, I think the DRT proceedings can always be referred to extend the period of limitation. If some evidence is available, yes, can be used. If OC supplied within 3 years with the acknowledgement and CD has not made entries in the books of accounts, then claimant not to suffer for rejection for the reason that CD not entered in the books of accounts. So books of accounts is one of the ways that the acknowledgement can be understood. If there are other ways of acknowledgement, then they will also be available.
Yes, yes.
So coming to
I think we
Philip,
can conclude that.
Yeah, I think there are questions, but I think
we can attend to them.
We can attend to them later.
Already it's more than 1 hour 40 minutes, so we can conclude this webinar. Alok ji had to go, so he has gone and he had an urgent meeting. Mamta Binani ji, we acknowledge her contribution in all the preparation, but she could not participate. Thank you, participants. Thanks a lot for staying with us for this period, and it is our pleasure. And in case there are other questions, we would try to answer that. Thank you very much, and we conclude. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.